He didn't just turn off the TV. He reached behind it, pulled the cord straight out of the wall, and let it snap against the hardwood floor like something lifeless. The screen went black in the middle of the sentence, right as the narrator was describing the final days of the Pacific Campaign in 1945. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick, intentional, controlled. Before I continue, please like and subscribe, but only if the story truly resonates with you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and what time is it there. Now, what hurt the most wasn't the unplugged cord lying there like a cut vein. It was my wife standing a few feet behind her son, saying nothing. I was sitting in my brown leather recliner, the one Martha and I bought back in 1998, watching a World War II documentary. I've always preferred history, the quiet kind, not explosions and dramatic music, the slow, steady kind that explains how ordinary people survive when the world around them is falling apart. The late October sunlight filtered through the living room windows at that perfect golden angle. The house had felt calm, still, safe. Then Ethan walked in. His footsteps were heavy, purposeful, the kind of walk that announces authority before a single word is spoken. Ethan Miller, 39 years old, calls himself an entrepreneur. I've yet to see one stable business tied to that title. He didn't ask what I was watching, didn't greet me, didn't even nod. He just stared at the television, like it had personally offended him. Seriously, he muttered. I lowered my glasses slightly and looked at him. It's a documentary. He stepped closer. It's depressing. Old men talking about old wars. We don't watch trash like this in this house. In this house, that phrase landed harder than the insult. Before I could respond, he reached behind the television and ripped the cord from the outlet. The sharp crack of plastic echoed louder than it should have. The screen went dark. My hand was still wrapped around the remote. 42 years as a certified public accountant taught me one important skill. Control your reaction. Keep your face neutral. Keep your voice steady. Never respond before you understand the full picture. But this wasn't about a television. This was about territory. I turned my head slowly. Excuse me. He tossed the cord onto the console table like it was garbage. We're trying to raise the energy in this house. You sitting here watching war stories all day isn't productive. I work part-time as a consultant. I manage my investments. I pay the property taxes, insurance, utilities, every bill that keeps this roof overhead. Yet he said it like I was just taking up space. I glanced past him. Martha stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, arms loosely folded, her expression unreadable. Martha? I asked gently. She avoided my eyes. Ethan just thinks we should focus on more positive programming, she said softly. Positive programming. I nodded once. Ethan, I said calmly, this is my television. He smiled, not warmly. It's our house. No, it wasn't. But I didn't say that. Not yet. I didn't argue. Instead, I leaned forward slowly and picked up the cord from the console table. I ran my fingers over the plastic edge where it had scraped against the outlet. It wasn't damaged beyond use, but the message behind it was clear. Ethan had not unplugged the television. He had tested a boundary. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen as if he had simply rearranged a chair. We'll talk about entertainment standards at dinner, he said casually over his shoulder. Entertainment standards. For the past 18 months, I had listened to small corrections like that. Maybe you shouldn't drive at night. Maybe let me handle the mail. Maybe we should refinance while you still qualify. Small suggestions, small shifts, the kind you ignore because you want peace, because you don't want your wife caught in the middle, because after Martha lost her first husband, grief had already taken enough from her. When we married 2 years ago, Ethan needed a temporary place to stay while reorganizing his business. Temporary became 18 months. 18 months of subtle repositioning. I sat there in the reflection of the blank screen. The room didn't feel louder. It felt occupied. I stood up carefully, my knees stiff, and went upstairs to my bedroom. It was the only space that still felt untouched. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in a while, I replayed everything. The expensive sound system Ethan insisted on installing. The afternoon, he reorganized my filing cabinet because I was overcomplicating things. The casual way he once asked where I kept the deed paperwork. The way he stopped calling me Mr. Harper and switched to Daniel. It wasn't open disrespect. It was positioning. A man doesn't rip a cord from the wall because of a documentary. He does it to see if you'll stand up. I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand. Caroline, my first wife, smiling in that quiet way she always had. She'd been gone 3 years now. She used to tell me, "Danny, you see patterns before anyone else. Don't ignore them." Patterns. Downstairs, I heard Ethan laughing in the kitchen. Martha's softer voice followed. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. This was something else. This felt like an audit. That night at dinner, Ethan explained what modern content consumption should look like. He spoke about mindset, growth, forward-thinking habits. Martha nodded occasionally. I listened. At 8:30 p.m., I went into my office, closed the door, and turned on my computer. I logged into my primary checking account. I hadn't examined it closely in a few months. I managed my finances carefully, but I hadn't felt the need to scrutinize them. Routine is predictable. The screen loaded. The first unfamiliar transfer caught my eye immediately. Consulting fee, EM Holdings, $8,000. 2 months ago. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened. I scrolled. Another transfer, $6,000. Then another, $3,000. Automatic. Small enough to blend in. Large enough to matter. EM Holdings. Ethan Miller. The television cord hadn't been about programming. It had been about control. And the moment he said, "In this house," I realized something. That wasn't his first move. It was just the first one loud enough for me to hear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, the soft ticking of the vents, the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs, pipes shifting when someone turned in bed. Every sound felt amplified. I have always trusted numbers more than feelings. Feelings can be shaped. Numbers leave evidence. At 5:12 a.m., I stopped pretending I was resting. I walked quietly to my office, closing the door behind me. Ethan and Martha were still asleep. I logged back into my bank account. Consulting fee, EM Holdings. I clicked the details. Authorized online. Recurring monthly. The first transfer had started 8 months ago. 8 months. I pulled up older statements. At first glance, everything looked normal. Utilities, groceries, insurance, property taxes. But when you review something with intention, patterns reveal themselves. The transfers weren't random. They arrived exactly 2 days after my pension deposit every month. Predictable. Timed. My pulse stayed steady. After 42 years as a CPA, I learned something important. Panic clouds judgment. Calm exposes truth. I downloaded every statement. Then I opened my credit report. I hadn't checked it in almost a year. There had been no reason to. My mortgage was paid off in 2011. No loans. No debt. The report loaded. There it was. Home equity line of credit. Opened 4 months ago. Limit, $35,000. Balance used, $18,400. I leaned back slowly. I had not opened any line of credit. I clicked the application file. Electronic signature. Daniel Harper. It looked almost right, but I've signed my name the same way since 1983. The version on that document had a slight upward hook at the end. I never hooked the end. The application date caught my attention. For days after Ethan helped reorganize my file cabinet, I remembered that afternoon clearly. He said my system was outdated, that everything should be digitized, that modern methods were more efficient. I remembered him holding my Social Security card. I remembered him studying my signature. Classic, he had said. The house didn't feel physically smaller, but it felt tighter. For 18 months, I had tolerated small changes. Ethan updating the Wi-Fi password for security. Ethan suggesting he manage property taxes. Ethan offering to streamline my investments. Each move presented as help, and I allowed it because I love my wife, because loneliness after losing Caroline had frightened me more than pride, because I convinced myself compromise was part of marriage. But compromise is not surrender. This wasn't support. This was positioning. At 6:02 a.m., I heard Ethan's footsteps upstairs. Heavy, confident. I closed my laptop quietly. But something inside me had already shifted. The television cord had been a signal. This was a pattern. I waited until I heard the front door close behind Ethan. Then I reopened my laptop. There was one more place I needed to look. Email. I rarely use the shared desktop downstairs anymore. Ethan had insisted certain accounts remain logged in for convenience. At the time, it seemed harmless. Convenience is a powerful disguise. Instead, I picked up the old iPad Caroline had given me years ago. It still synced occasionally. Slowly but reliably, I logged in. Several unread messages caught my attention. Subject line, long-term care planning, preliminary discussion. My body didn't react the way it had earlier. It didn't tighten. It steadied. I opened the thread. The conversation was between Ethan and a woman named Rachel Lawson, senior living consultant, Sunridge Assisted Living. Ethan had written, "We're exploring options for a relative showing mild cognitive decline. We want to transition him smoothly before things worsen." Relative, transition him. I scroll further. Rachel's response was professional. To proceed, they would require physician's evaluation, documentation of financial readiness, and power of attorney authorization. Power of attorney. There was an attachment. I opened it. Draft document. Principal, Daniel Harper. Agent, Ethan Miller. My breathing remained controlled. He wasn't just moving money. He was building a narrative. I continued reading. In another message, Ethan wrote, "My mother agrees it may be time. He's been forgetful lately." My mother agrees. Martha was copied on the thread. She had not replied, but she had not objected either. The room felt colder. Suddenly, the television cord made sense. It wasn't about programming. It was about perception. Old man watches depressing shows. Old man is unproductive. Old man forgets things. Old man shouldn't manage finances. Old man should transition. And once transitioned, house valued at $740,000. Equity line active. Liquid assets accessible. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in 18 months, I didn't feel confused. I felt clear. When you audit a business, you don't accuse immediately. You gather. You verify. You secure what can be secured. At 7:30 a.m., there was a knock on my office door. "Hey, Daniel," Ethan said casually. "You good? You seemed a little off last night." He leaned against the doorframe like he owned it. "I'm fine," I replied evenly. "Good. We just want what's best for you." "Of course you do." I smiled slightly. "I appreciate that." He nodded and walked away. At 8:10, Martha left for work. At 8:20, Ethan followed. By 8:22, I had my phone in my hand. There is one person who has known me longer than either of them. Michael Reynolds, my attorney for nearly 20 years. When he answered, his voice was still thick with sleep. "Danny, everything okay?" I looked at the stack of printed statements beside me. Every transfer, every signature, every email. "I need to review some documents," I said calmly, "and I need to do it today." There was a pause. Then his tone shifted. "Tell me what's going on." For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like a husband trying to keep peace. I felt like an auditor building a case. By 9:30 that morning, I was sitting across from Michael in his downtown office. The blinds were half closed, and the room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Between us sat a neat stack of printed statements. He didn't interrupt while I explained. He didn't react emotionally. He read, line by line, transaction by transaction. When he finished, he placed both hands flat on his desk. "This isn't careless," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "It's structured." He slid the home equity agreement forward. The signature is close enough that most banks wouldn't question it without a challenge. I never authorized it. "I believe you." He leaned back in his chair. "And this assisted living email thread?" he continued. "That concerns me more than the money." I nodded. "He's constructing a capacity argument," Michael said. If someone convinces a physician you're declining and there's a power of attorney draft ready, things can move quickly. I'm not declining. I know that, he said calmly. But perception can be engineered. Engineered. That word fit perfectly. For 18 months, Ethan had been shaping perception. The television incident wasn't impulsive. It reinforced a story. Old man, outdated habits, poor judgment. Michael tapped the papers again. First, we freeze everything, he said. I'll contact the bank's legal department and file fraud alerts. Second, you formally revoke any implied financial authority. Even if it was never granted, we document it. Understood. Third, he added, you document every interaction from this point forward. I've already started. He gave a small approving nod. I also recommend something proactive, he continued carefully. Schedule a voluntary cognitive evaluation. I held his gaze. To remove the narrative before it gains traction, he clarified. It stung, not because I doubted myself, but because someone in my own home had made it necessary. By noon, fraud alerts were filed. The home equity line was frozen pending investigation. The recurring transfers were halted. But something still bothered me. Can we trace where the money went? I asked. Yes, Michael replied. But once we subpoena accounts, this escalates. There's a moment in every audit where you decide whether you're correcting a mistake or uncovering intent. This wasn't a mistake. By 2:15 p.m., I was back home. The house felt strangely peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. The coffee pot still carried the scent of the morning brew. The television remained dark. The cord still hung loosely behind it. I didn't plug it in. Instead, I walked upstairs to the guest room Ethan used as his office. I didn't search aggressively. I observed. Desk surface clear. Laptop gone. But on the bookshelf were 3 folders. Expansion strategy. Liquidity plan. Asset transition. My hand paused on the last one. Asset transition. Inside were printed property assessments of my home, recent market comparisons, estimated sale values, a spreadsheet projecting post-care surplus after liquidation. At the bottom of one page, written in Ethan's handwriting, were 2 words. After evaluation. I closed the folder slowly. This wasn't about helping me. It was about removing me. And for the first time since Caroline passed, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, clarity. I carried the folders downstairs and placed them carefully on the dining table. I didn't slam them down. I didn't pace. I simply sat and waited. At 5:47 p.m., Martha's car pulled into the driveway. Her steps inside were lighter than Ethan's always were. She walked into the dining room and stopped when she saw the folders. Her expression changed instantly. Daniel, she said cautiously, what is this? I turned one folder toward her. Asset transition, I read aloud. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. Property valuations, equity breakdowns, sale projections. I didn't, she began. You were copied on the emails, I said calmly. She swallowed. I thought he was just researching options. For you, he said you'd been forgetful lately. I have no mortgage, I replied evenly, and I manage my accounts daily. She sat down slowly. He said refinancing would stabilize things. He said supervision would make you safer. Safer? I leaned back. Martha, did you believe I was declining? She hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. I didn't know what to think, she whispered. It wasn't dramatic betrayal. It was doubt, and doubt is enough. At 6:02 p.m., the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside and froze when he saw us at the table. What's going on? He asked. Sit down, I said. He didn't. His eyes moved to the folders. Recognition flashed, followed quickly by calculation. What are those doing out? He asked. I'm auditing, I replied. He let out a short laugh. Auditing what? My life. Silence filled the room. I slid the home equity agreement across the table. You open a line of credit in my name. He didn't deny it immediately. Instead, he smiled slightly. It was strategic. You would have benefited. You forged my signature. That's dramatic. No, I said quietly. It's precise. Martha flinched at the word. And the assisted living evaluation? I asked. We're thinking long term, he replied. No, I said calmly. You're thinking ownership. Martha's voice broke. Ethan, he didn't look at her. He looked at me. You can't manage everything forever, he said. I held his gaze. Watch me. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his expression. The television cord had been a test. This was the real confrontation. And he was beginning to understand something important. I wasn't confused. I was calculating. Ethan didn't explode. That would have been easier. Explosions are loud. They give you something clear to point at. Instead, he went quiet, not embarrassed, not confused, evaluating. You're misunderstanding this, he said finally, smoothing his tone. I was optimizing things. You've always been cautious with money. In my name? I asked. We discussed leveraging equity. We did not discuss forging my signature. He exhaled slowly, like I was being unreasonable. You're overreacting. No, I replied calmly. I'm responding. He looked at his mother, searching for support. Martha's eyes stayed on the table. That was the first visible shift. Small, but real. I have a call, Ethan muttered. We'll revisit this when you've calmed down. He turned and walked upstairs. Calm down. The most dangerous mistake someone can make is confusing silence with weakness. I gathered the folders and took them into my office. I locked the door behind me. Then I made 3 calls. The first was to the bank, confirming the fraud alert and freeze on the home equity line. The investigation had already been escalated internally. Good. The second call was to a locksmith. I need all exterior locks replaced tomorrow, I said. Front, back, garage, every entry point. There was a pause. Security issue? Yes. 9 a.m. work? It does. The third call was harder. I stepped into the hallway. Martha, I said gently, I need you to take tomorrow off work. She looked tired. Why? Because things are about to become clear. She nodded slowly. That night, the house felt different. Not tense, decisive. Ethan stayed upstairs. No pacing. No television. Just silence. I slept better than the night before. Not peacefully, but with direction. At 8:55 a.m., the locksmith arrived. The sound of drilling into the front door brought Ethan downstairs quickly. What is that? He demanded. New locks, I answered evenly. For what? For security. He looked at Martha. You knew about this? She hesitated. Yes. Second shift. You can't just change the locks, he snapped. I can, I replied calmly. It's my house. The words settled in the room. He laughed once. You're spiraling. No, I said, I'm protecting assets. The locksmith worked methodically, replacing deadbolts, reinforcing plates, rekeying everything. At 10:12 a.m., the final lock clicked into place. I signed the invoice and placed every spare key in my pocket. Ethan stood near the entryway, arms crossed. So what's the plan now? He asked coldly. The plan, I said, is accountability. At 11:30 a.m., the bank called. I stepped into my office and closed the door before answering. The representative spoke clearly. The home equity withdrawals had been traced to an account under EM Holdings, Ethan's business entity. From there, the money had been transferred into a personal brokerage account. Speculative trades, high-risk options, significant losses. I thanked her and hung up. When I walked back into the living room, Ethan and Martha both looked up. The bank confirmed the funds were moved into your trading account, I said calmly. Martha's breath caught. Ethan's composure cracked for just a second. It was temporary leverage, he said quickly. You wouldn't understand the strategy. You lost $17,000, I replied. That's market fluctuation. That's fraud. He stepped toward me now, anger rising. You wouldn't even notice the money if I hadn't pushed growth. I noticed. I said evenly, eventually. He scoffed. You're acting like a victim. No, I said, I'm acting like the owner. The word shifted the room again. Owner. At noon, Michael emailed a formal notice. Fraud report filed. Intent to pursue restitution. Investigation in progress. I forwarded it to Ethan. He read it on his phone, his expression moving from irritation to calculation. You involved lawyers? He asked. I already did. Martha looked shaken. Daniel, maybe we can handle this privately. We tried private, I said gently. Private is how we got here. Ethan stepped closer. Do you have any idea what this will do to Mom? Yes, I replied. That's why I'm stopping it now. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some hero? I think I'm done being passive. The afternoon sunlight streamed to the living room again, same angle as the day he pulled the television cord. I walked to the console, picked up the cord, and plugged it back in. The screen lit up. History Channel. Low volume. Steady narration. Ethan stared at it. It's not about the show, I said calmly. He met my eyes. I know, he answered. At 6:08 p.m., he tried his garage key. It didn't work. He stood there staring at the lock, then at me. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. At 6:12 p.m., I heard his engine again, not leaving, returning. The gravel in the driveway shifted sharply under his tires. Something had changed in his face. The calculation was fading, and something far less controlled was starting to surface. The front door handle jerked violently. Once, twice, then pounding. Open the door. Ethan's voice carried through the wood, stripped of polish. I didn't rush. I muted the television, stood slowly, and engaged the security chain before opening the door a few inches. His face was flushed now. Anger had replaced calculation. What do you think you're doing? He demanded. Protecting my property. I replied evenly. You locked me out. I changed the locks. You can't just exile me. This isn't exile, I said calmly. It's consequence. Martha stood behind me in the hallway, trembling. Ethan, please. He ignored her. You think this makes you powerful? You're paranoid. You're unstable. If I were unstable, I said quietly, I wouldn't have documentation. I slid a folder through the narrow opening. Bank confirmations, fraud reports, transaction summaries. He didn't take it. I don't need your paperwork. That's unfortunate, I replied, because the bank's legal department already has it. That wasn't entirely complete yet, but it was in motion. His breathing shifted, less dramatic, more dangerous. You're going to regret this, he said. I already regret trusting you. For a moment, I thought he might force the door. Instead, he stepped back and kicked the porch railing hard enough to rattle it. Then he stormed toward his car. I closed the door gently, not slammed, gently. At 8:41 p.m., headlights flashed across the living room walls again. This time, there was no knocking. The mailbox went first, a metallic crunch. Then something shattered against the garage door. Spray paint hissed. Martha screamed from the kitchen. I didn't run outside. I pressed record. Through the front window, my phone captured everything. Red paint dripping down the garage door. Thief. The irony was almost precise. He hurled something at the porch light. Glass exploded. Neighbors' lights flicked on. Voices murmured. Tires screeched as he sped away. I dialed 911. My voice remained steady as I described vandalism, financial exploitation, and escalating threats. 2 patrol cars arrived within 12 minutes. I showed them the video. I handed them printed documentation. One officer looked at me carefully. Has he threatened you before? Yes. We'll file this immediately. By 11:27 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Harper, Officer Murrah said, We've located Mr. Miller. He's been apprehended 4 blocks from your residence. There were spray cans and tools in the vehicle. Martha covered her mouth. He's being charged with criminal mischief and financial exploitation pending investigation. The officer continued. There will be a restraining order hearing within 48 hours. I'll be there, I said. When I hung up, the house felt different. Not peaceful. Aligned. Yesterday, he pulled a cord from the wall to test control. Tonight, he learned something. The door he tried to manage was never his to command. I didn't expect to sleep that night. But sometime after midnight, sitting upright in my recliner with the television muted and the lights dim, exhaustion took over. At 3:17 a.m., my phone vibrated. I answered before the second buzz. "This is Officer Ramirez." The voice said, "I wanted to update you." I listened quietly. Ethan had been processed and was being held. He was agitated. He claimed the financial accusations were fabricated. He insisted I was mentally unstable. Of course he did. He also attempted to contact your wife several times, the officer added. A temporary restraining order will be placed automatically due to the vandalism and financial concerns. He won't be allowed within 500 feet of the residence. "I understand," I replied. When I ended the call, Martha looked at me from across the room. "He thinks you're unstable," she whispered. "He needs that narrative," I said calmly. "Without it, he is nothing." By morning, my attorney called again. The bank had completed its preliminary review. The home equity line was officially classified as fraudulent activity. "They traced the transfers," Michael said. "Significant losses. High-risk trading. It appears he was attempting to recover prior losses with increasing leverage. A spiral. That explained the urgency." Around noon, Martha's phone rang. She hesitated before answering. I could hear Ethan's voice faintly, rapid, defensive. "He's twisting everything," Ethan insisted. "You said he was forgetting things." Martha's voice trembled. "You said he was declining. We were protecting assets." "You forged his signature," she replied softly. Silence followed. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, the restraining order was delivered formally, 500 feet. No contact, no financial access. A legal boundary had been drawn. 2 days later, we attended the temporary hearing. Ethan stood across the courtroom, composed but tense. His lawyer spoke about misunderstandings, about good intentions. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. Financial records, vandalism footage, email correspondence discussing assisted living. "Mr. Harper," the judge asked, "have you undergone a cognitive evaluation?" "Yes, Your Honor." Michael had arranged one the day before. Voluntary. Comprehensive. The report was handed forward. The judge skimmed it. "Cognitive function above average for age," he read. A shift moved through the courtroom. Narrative dismantled. The restraining order was extended pending full investigation. Court adjourned. As we stepped outside, Ethan leaned close enough for me to hear him. "This isn't over," he said quietly. I looked at him without anger. "You're right," I replied calmly. "It's not," but not in the way he meant. For months later, the house felt like itself again. Not because the walls had changed, not because the locks were new, but because the quiet tension that once moved through the rooms like an unseen draft was gone. The garage had been repainted, the mailbox replaced, the porch light repaired. If you drove past from the street, you would never guess what had happened here. But I would, and that mattered. The financial investigation concluded in early February. The bank formally classified the home equity line as fraud. Charges were filed. Ethan accepted a plea deal, restitution, probation, mandatory financial counseling. He never went to trial. He didn't want the emails read aloud in open court. He didn't want a phrase cognitive decline entered into public record. For someone who preferred control, transparency was unbearable. Martha finalized the separation shortly after. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was tired. We sat at the same dining table where I had first laid out the folder labeled Asset Transition and signed the papers quietly. "I don't know how I missed it," she said once, staring at the wood grain. "You wanted to believe him." I replied gently. "I wanted to believe you were safe," she whispered. I said. "I just wasn't alert. Trust is not weakness, but trust without verification is risk." After she moved into a small apartment across town, the house felt larger at first, echoing, then steady. On Wednesday mornings, I started something new. It began with 3 people sitting around my dining table. A retired teacher whose grandson convinced her co-sign loans she didn't understand. A widower whose daughter borrowed from his retirement account without clear terms. A former mechanic pressured into signing power of attorney after a questionable diagnosis. We didn't call it therapy. We called it the Wednesday audit. Coffee, printed statements, calm conversation. No shame, just clarity. The first time I told my story out loud, my voice didn't shake. It started with a television cord. I told them, but it was never about the television. They nodded because they understood. Small actions are rarely small. They are signals. At home, I kept the cord Ethan had ripped from the wall, not as a trophy, not as a reminder of anger, but as a symbol. The moment silence ended. Some evenings, I sit in my recliner and let the television play quietly. History documentaries, old westerns, sometimes even the news. No one walks in to unplug it. No one comments on productivity. The house breathes differently now, not because conflict never existed, but because boundaries do. A few weeks ago, Martha stopped by. She stood on the porch, well outside the legal boundary placed around her son, and held a casserole dish in both hands like something fragile. "I'm sorry," she said, "not for loving him, for doubting me." "I know," I replied. "We don't speak often now, but when we do, it's honest. That's enough." As for Ethan, I don't follow what became of his business. I don't check market reports connected to his name. Accountability has its own momentum. I don't need to supervise it. Sometimes people ask if I feel vindicated. I don't. Vindication implies victory. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. There's something you learn after auditing finances for more than 40 years. Discrepancies rarely begin with massive theft. They begin with rounding errors, small assumptions, overlooked details. Left alone, they grow. Addressed early, they resolve. My life was no different. I ignored the rounding errors, the subtle comments, the reorganized paperwork, the shifted language. In this house, that phrase still echoes in my memory sometimes. But now it lands differently. Yes, in this house, in this life, in this mind, I remain the owner.